All right, good evening, welcome. This is our second presentation of the educational benefits of the project. There will be a lot of discussion though about grade configuration. We know that is a hot topic as well. My name is Jason Malinowski. I'm the chair of the Neary Building Committee. We have one other building committee member here tonight, Denise Eddy. This presentation will be led mainly by our school administration. I will be happy to help moderate the Q&A at the end and add anything else related to the project at the end. But we'd ask, let them kind of go through their presentation and then we will entertain any sort of Q&A at the end if that works for everyone else. All right, that, Superintendent Martineau.
So happy Thursday, hopefully you had a great day. And I'm still waiting for spring. Today felt a little more like spring than the past several weeks, but it's not quite up to my expectations yet. So hopefully in the next few weeks. So good evening and thank you for taking the time to attend this evening's session. I think all along our goal has been to try to provide the citizens with good information to make an informed decision, whatever that decision may be. And we've had the Neary Building Committee, as Jason had mentioned, has had several sessions focused on the finances. This focus is just on kind of the educational features. And then there's another session next week on the site. And again, the goal of trying to make sure that people have good information and questions are answered. So joining me this evening, we have a few members of our leadership team who will be helping talk about the educational features of the design. So again, I'm Greg Martineau and I have the privilege of serving as your superintendent.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Reinhardt and I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning.
Good evening, I'm Keith Lavoie. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Operations for the district.
Hi, I'm Steve Mucci, the principal of the Woodward School.
Good evening, I'm Kathleen Valenti, the principal of the Neary School.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Clayton Ryan, principal of the Fenton School.
And also we have two members of our Student Support Services Department. We have Helene Desjardins and Deb Lemieux. They are Assistant Directors of Student Support Services. So this evening, we hope to accomplish focusing on the educational features of the design. We have been on a 5-year journey to get to this point, to have this preferred option being brought forth to voters. I think the project really started with a town capital planning school research subcommittee, and it was tasked to really look at enrollment trends, school spaces, and make a recommendation around how we can use existing spaces. It tasked the district to do an evaluation of grade configurations, the buildings we have, and make a recommendation around the next generation of facilities or how we use the facilities. That work really drove the process of submitting a statement of interest to the Mass School Building Authority, who is a quasi-governmental agency who partners with cities and towns to fund core building programs. So through that work, we worked with the school committee at the time, also the select board. We drafted a statement of interest and we were invited into MSBA's core building program. And that's a very prescriptive process. There are milestones and phases that we have to move through. So we've moved through eligibility, feasibility, schematic design, and that's where we're at in terms of schematic design and a vote for the citizens of Southborough. So what you're seeing this evening is a lot of input and feedback. The way MSBA works is that it really centers around what are your educational plans and goals you're trying to accomplish. It does not start with, well, what spaces do you want? It starts with, what's your educational plan? What's your vision? What are you trying to accomplish? And being very clear on that plan. And then using that plan to drive the design, to really think about what spaces in the design help achieve the goals set out in the educational plan. So we do need to do something. So Neary has served the community well for many decades, but I think it lacks the modern facility that we currently need. There are limitations in the types of programs we can offer. I think the building, electrical systems, the roof, windows, HVAC, the building envelope, it is dated and it's time for something different, something new. And that is the process that the Neary Building Committee has been on in terms of deciding what. So ADA compliance, that's not compliant. Building safety, security, it wasn't designed in a time where the same thought and planning went into school security. So it was designed in the 60s and built early 70s. It has no fire suppression. It doesn't meet modern building codes. So the building lacks some of the things we would expect in a modern school. And there's been no major capital investment since its opening in the 1970s, outside of regular maintenance and addition of a few permanent modular classrooms and some improvements to the roof. But again, if you go through the building, it looks like it did probably when it opened up in the 1970s. And our facility staff have done a great job maintaining the building. It's very clean. So it looks like it's been maintained well. So educational features. So this evening we'll talk about what we think the features are of the design that we're proposing, which is a new construction housing grades 2 through 5. So here's the design from our architects. You'll notice some key features. You'll notice the indoor fun park. And then I think, Larry, am I correct? The designer put the sleepover room party. So this was version 1. Version 2, we added a pool. So we now have a pool and a tree house. And then in version 3, called the Woodchuck School, we pared down some of the design. So along the way, we did work with faculty and staff to talk about how they use spaces. We work with students to think about, if you were to design a school, what would you include? A lot of slides, a lot of pools, arcades. And Principal Ryan was looking at the scale here, like cafeteria, 7 inches, office, so we were trying to convert the scale, but we weren't able to. So features of a new school, grades 2 through 5. Again, the design is really centered around the educational program vision. It does align with the district's strategic plan, Vision 2026. And I would say part of the design, or actually a major feature of the design, is that it really prioritizes student and staff safety with state-of-the-art security systems, including controlled entry points, surveillance, emergency response plans, and it also looks to create secure learning environments where we're building a strong sense of community. This is a rendering of the school, and we'll take a tour of the school in a few moments. But one of the design features that I'd like to highlight is just the traffic flow at the school. So it's very intentional. We have the bus drop-off separated from parent drop-off. Again, if you are at Neary School and you've ever participated in parent pickup or drop-off, you'll notice that it's very chaotic. So part of the design thinking is how do we use the space outside of the school, and then how do we use the space within the school? So what we'll talk about next is really the academic areas and spaces, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Reinhardt.
Okay, thank you. So you have the clicker, so we'll do a hand up. Thank you. So first I'm going to talk about the model of having a 4-grade school and the thinking around that. So by having 4 grades, one of the things we hear from parents regularly about is, and from teachers, is the challenge of the many transitions in our current Southborough model. Every 2 years, students are moving to the next school. So they're either entering, and we're working hard on entering, or they're preparing to exit. And the process of those transitions, the work between educators, takes months. And so the principals work very closely together, but when we're working across buildings on these transitions, it's an enormous investment of time and resources. And it takes a lot of energy for the kids, right? They're starting over, they're building new relationships, everything is new, they're learning a new building, and for the families, building new relationships with the principal, with their teachers. So one of the advantages of a 4-grade model is greater continuity in the experience of students, in the experience of families, in that academic progression, being able to transition kids to the next grade more seamlessly and follow their progress. Also in their social emotional experience, having that consistency of the expectations and the experience for a longer period of time. For the parents, many of our parents are navigating multiple buildings, so it also streamlines the communication and their experiences of interacting with the schools. And in addition, it allows our educators to have greater vertical alignment, meaning across grades. So where it is a real challenge, and we work hard to do it, working across the buildings for that collaboration is much harder than when the grade levels are housed in the same building, and we can have that cross-grade level collaboration. Also, having a 4-grade configuration allows for a lot of opportunities around peer leadership and peer mentoring. We have, and I know Mr. Martineau shared the example at school committee last night, in some of our Northborough schools where we have a wider grade span, we have K through 5 schools, we have opportunities where, whether it's student councils that are helping to lead activities in the school and are run by the older students in the school, or peer mentors, or even things like families within the school where you might have children from all different grade levels who come together regularly as a family within the larger community. So there's a lot of opportunities for building those connections among students across the larger grade span. It also provides us opportunities for teachers in terms of teacher mentoring. We find it to be a great challenge to have mentors working across buildings. So when we have a person that we think the right mentor, but they're in a different building and we're spread across 3 buildings, that is a significant challenge. So that is something that would be an advantage as well. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of the design to really orient you, and then we'll dive deeper into some of the features. So just so you get a sense of how the building is set up. So this would be on the current Neary site, and if you look at the bottom of the screen, this is the front of the building. So the entrance, the main entrance is right in the middle. To the left of the entrance, you see the gymnasium in light green. You have the orange, which is the nurses, the medical suite. The darker orange is the main office. Moving across the main entrance, we have the music, sort of a suite of rooms, the cafeteria, and the kitchen and all of those pieces. And then going up, sort of perpendicular to the front of the building, are the 2 wings that we call the learning neighborhoods. And each one would represent a grade level. So this is the first floor, so you might have a grade level on the left and another grade level on the right. And we'll talk some more about these features. This is the second floor. So now as you go to the second floor, if we look at the front of the building first, we have art and the library media center, and those are kind of your common spaces up front. And then we have the mechanical, utilities, non-children space. And then we have 2 more learning neighborhoods. So you have a grade level on, the first floor, you have a grade level, another grade level above it on the second floor, and then the same thing on the right side as well. So that's kind of our big picture tour of the building, and now we'll speak a little bit more specifically about some of the features. So the learning neighborhoods is a concept that, as we had the design team working together over time, we had educators of all different disciplines, we had special education, principals, we had music teachers, we had all different people involved. This concept of a learning neighborhood was really important, to have that sense of community. So as we bring 4 grades together, and with the advantages that that brings, we're also talking about a much larger school. By having our grade levels together in this sort of learning pod, we can have that smaller community within the larger community. And we have the space within that for them to gather as a grade level team. So it could be, there's one in every learning neighborhood. There's one wall that is a retractable wall so that you can open the classrooms up and have a larger space there. And there's also the learning commons, which we'll talk more about, but that is this larger hallway, what would traditionally be a hallway, but is an intentionally larger space designed to be able to build community and gather people together in that space. So there's a lot of opportunities to sort of build that sense of community within the learning neighborhoods. The other thing I wanted to point out about the learning neighborhoods is, so switch to this slide. This is a schematic of the learning neighborhood. Sorry, the learning commons. So the learning commons, this is what I was saying is kind of like that enhanced hallway. Have flexible furniture, has a science bench, which you can see in the back there where there's running water. And so you have a lot of different opportunities to bring people together within that space. So as we think about the learning neighborhoods and really the entire design process, a high priority was making sure that we were building a building that was fully accessible and inclusive. So obviously a minimum expectation that we would be fully ADA compliant. But we wanted to go way beyond that. We really want this to be a space that in the design is building that experience of all children and all teachers feeling that sense of inclusivity. So as you look at the learning neighborhoods and you look at the design, I'm going to point out a few features that contributed to that accessibility and inclusivity. The pink classrooms, so if in this neighborhood there's one large pink classroom on each neighborhood, those are special education rooms for some of our special education programs that are specifically designed for some of our populations of students. And we designed to increase the amount of programming that we can do so that some of our students who currently are served by going out of district and attending other schools because we don't have the programming for them, we would be able to bring them back into the district and keep them with their peers here in Southborough. In addition, the small pink rooms that look kind of like pink squares sandwiched in between the classrooms are small group rooms that would allow us to provide students with environments to receive the support and services that they need very close to their classrooms within the learning neighborhood. So that whether they are working with a speech and language pathologist or they're working with an educational support professional, they have a space where they can go, a quiet space, get the support they need, but they're not traveling all the way across the building. And they're able to do it not sitting in the hallway at a table, but rather in a space with integrity. In addition, we have next to the gymnasium, and we'll look at this more closely later, an adaptive PE space. So that's adaptive physical education, next to physical therapy, next to occupational therapy, so that we can again have that inclusive opportunities as students are having their physical education and the services that they need. The other thing I'll point out is the speech and language, well, let's see, school psychologists, behavior specialists, speech and language pathologists, many of our service providers are often sharing spaces currently or using spaces, sometimes working with students in the hallway. And in this design, they have designated spaces where if they are assessing a student or they're working with a small group, they're designated spaces close to the learning neighborhoods where they have the privacy that they need and the space that they need to provide those services. Another theme that really permeated through our planning and our discussions was about creating flexible and adaptable learning spaces and thinking about the future, trying to think about, we don't know what school, like what learning is going to look like 40 years from now, but trying to design a school that is going to be adaptable and flexible so that we can change with the times and the use of the school can change with the times. And so some of that was about having simplicity where we could, right? And so having classrooms where the shapes and the spaces and the walls are allowing for flexibility and adaptability. In addition, we wanted to make sure we were going to have the state-of-the-art technology in all of these spaces. So for example, not only would there be the technology in all of the classrooms, but the learning commons would also be equipped with the technology necessary, that if a teacher were bringing a group of students into the learning commons, they have the technology they need to teach those students and access the curriculum and resources. By having all of these spaces fully equipped and having the small group rooms right there in the learning neighborhoods, there are a lot of choices about the learning environments that students can engage in. So it might be that a classroom is working on a project and there are some students that are working with an educational support professional in the learning commons, and there might be another student or two that are in a small group room and some students that are in the classroom. So we're creating that flexibility and that adaptability to be able to meet students where they are and have universally designed learning and access for all students, and that accessibility for the teachers to have those choices. One of the things that Mr. Martineau often says is, right now we think a lot about space, about finding space, about sharing space, about working within the spaces we have. And ideally, when we design well and intentionally, flexibly, adaptively, inclusively, we don't want to have to think about space. We want the teachers thinking about the learning and the teaching and not how to work around the space that they're in. I'm trying to think. The other, I think I'll leave it there for now. So at the same time that we're aiming for that adaptability, and so simplicity is important in some of the spaces, there are other spaces where we want them to be intentionally designed for the discipline or for the purpose that they serve. So for example, when we think about, I have the front of the building first floor at the top and the front of the building second floor at the bottom. So if we look at the first floor, we have the cafeteria on the right, and we have, and we're going to look at this more closely, but we have a small dining area kind of see if I can use my pointer here, right? I don't know if you can see it. It's not really working. But there's a small dining area attached to the larger dining area, so that if you have students who might be overwhelmed by that full cafeteria, there's a quieter space that they can use for eating. But that can also be opened up so that when we need the space to be used at full capacity, we can bring that into the full capacity. The cafeteria is also a cafetorium, meaning that it serves as an auditorium and a cafeteria, and there's a stage that attaches to the cafeteria, and I'll show you that in more detail in a moment. On the second floor, the art room is designed to be an art room with a kiln attached to it. And the library media area is also on the second floor, and again, intentionally designed for its purpose, with more than one teaching area within the library, with quiet spaces where students can read and all of those things that you would want in a library. So if we zoom in on the music facilities, again, what we have here, so this is I don't know if that's a schematic or a picture from somewhere else, but this is the idea that the music spaces would be designed with the acoustics that we need, with the appropriate size of rooms that we need for the types of ensembles and music groups that we have. We have a highly developed, really rich music program that runs across our schools with many, many students participating. And we, right now, central office, we are at the Neary School and get to hear the music all day long. And as we like to joke, we also trip on the instruments in the hallway all the time. But this is designed to have instrument storage. And it's designed to be near the front door, so that as students arrive at school, instruments can be dropped off at the music suite before they continue on to their classroom. And then we have two smaller ensemble spaces, and then a larger music practice room. The larger room, let's see if I can go to the larger room, which is where you see the semicircles of chairs, is attached to the back of the stage and at the same level as the stage. So if you imagine with this stage, at the back of the stage, there would be a retractable wall. That wall could be opened up to the larger music room, which would make the stage deeper to have greater capacity for a large chorus or a large orchestra performance. Or that wall can be closed, and then your stage is one space that can be used as a single space, and your large music room is a separate space. So again, thinking about all of these details about how it will be used. The gymnasium is a whole nother area where we really thought carefully about the design. This is something that we know the community has great interest in using beyond the school day. And so one of the important pieces as we design the building is that it can be segmented. So if the gymnasium or the cafeteria or the library media room is being used on the weekend, we can close off the access to the learning neighborhoods so that it is just contained in the area that we need people to have access to. The gymnasium can be used as a full gym with stands, or during teaching times, it might be that the screen is down between the middle of the gym so that you have two different classes that could be functioning at the same time. And then you have your adaptive physical education, OT and PT, adjacent to the gymnasium. Right now, those are not all together and adjacent to each other, and so that collaboration and that integration and inclusion is not possible in the same ways, and they are really not spaces that were designed for those purposes. They are spaces that we have made work for those purposes right now. So this is an enlargement of that, and then the nurse's office is to the right of the adapted PE and OT, And in addition, there's a special education conference room. And that's important to point out because that's another example of where we are using spaces as we can. Sometimes our conference rooms aren't big enough for those meetings, and so we're using classrooms. And so this would be a dedicated space where parents are able to meet with special education teams, and/or special education teams are meeting with each other, potentially to prepare for a meeting with parents. The nurse's office also is near the front of the building with access to an exit, so that if you have a time where there's an emergency or where a student is going home sick, there's easy access from the nurse's suite to an exit to meet the parents and support that child. I should go back to one of the, do you want to go to next steps, or do you want to go back to one of the pictures of the whole design?
Let's go back to another picture of the entire school.
That's what I was thinking too. So there's a couple things that, what, first floor?
So before we open it up for questions, I just want to comment on, it's not that often that a community gets to think about designing a school from the ground up. Oftentimes, towns and cities have spaces and they fit into spaces. So you'll see a lot of towns and cities that have buildings and they've tried to use the space as best they can, but not necessarily intentionally designed for how they're using the space. So this was a great opportunity to collaborate with our educators, with the community, to really think about what is the next generation of school facility that would serve the community of Southborough well for the next 5 decades. And that is a very exciting opportunity and a big responsibility. So this work was done with great intention, great thought, and great care. And this is the preferred option that will be brought forth to the voters at the May 10th. And I just want to also recognize in the audience is our architect, Arrow Street, Larry Spang. So he's been along this journey with us. Again, we've partnered with Larry and the Arrow Street team along this journey. So that said, I will open it up for any questions, and would just ask that you state your name and address, and that you use the microphone because we are recording, and that way we can pick up any questions through the recording.
One, two. There you go. Hi, I'm Tom Gittens. I live at 73 Flag Road. I got a ton of questions. I don't know whether you want me to ask one and then come back, or how you want to handle it. I unfortunately was out of town for about a year with some personal things, so I missed much of this. So let me just start off by saying thanks for all the hard work, Mr. Malinowski and the whole committee, architect. It's obviously very impressive. My first question, I can't help but when I looked at the pictures that you showed, it showed what appeared to be a balcony that was open that kids can stand and throw things off of. Is that a misreading of the picture, or is that picture just kind of like a placeholder? It's right there.
There you go. So that is a rendering of the main
Mike.
hallway.
Mike, please.
Thank you. Followed my own advice. So that is a rendering of the main hallway leading into the 2 wings, the academic wings. It is open, it is a balcony. We have balconies in other facilities that we have, and we've not had any issues with kids throwing things over those, and it is part of the design.
Okay. You really haven't, huh? Anyway.
I will clarify that we have had students throw things, but we actually did a STEM project where
we had an educator from the U.S. Army come in, and we were doing parachute drops. So it was actually a great opportunity for kids to practice, the design process, and then actually seeing their projects in action. So we have dropped things from the balcony, but it was intentional and for a learning purpose.
Well, I'd just be worried about kids dropping over it.
That has not happened.
But everywhere in the world, they're putting fences up, right, to keep people from jumping off of buildings. But anyway, could you go to the picture of the whole site plan? And I know this isn't the site plan review, but it just wasn't clear. So is this in the same place as the current school?
Yes.
It is. And I'm guessing you already thought, Mr. Malinowski, about either moving it over to the other side of the property so it's far away from the landfill, or down to Finn. And that, if that's the other meeting, I'll move on and come back and ask that later.
It is at the top.
Bottom.
Hold the red button.
You can share mine.
It is the other meeting. The meeting on next Wednesday is going to focus primarily on the landfill itself, right? What mitigation measures have occurred. But your question's an important one, and I'm happy to take it because we actually started out on the existing playing fields. That's about 2 years ago we were out there.
That's what I think.
And we were doing a lot of work out there. But we did more testing and more study. There are two main reasons we moved actually back to the main site. One is the proximity. There's a ton of conservation, wetlands, significant buffer zones required. So we were going to have significant mitigation that was going to be needed over there. The second thing we did was we actually tested the soil over there. And we were going to have to excavate at least 6 inches of soil. Feet, big difference in inches. 6 feet of soil on that entire parcel and bring in new soil. So just think about how many truckloads that would be.
Because
It wasn't structural soil. It was basically filled back in whenever that original site was designed. So we came back over to what we knew and we know continues to work. That's where we did all of our perk testing. And we also, at the original point in time, thought we were going to have students in the building during any proposed construction. We've now been able to figure out a temporary solution for that as well. So we were going to make use of the existing site, which we had greater understanding about, right, as part of the mitigation as well.
And I'm sure you considered just building this down in Finn, but there's also a whole bunch of open land that I know is park or fields now, but could be built there and then move the fields up here. I don't know.
We did. There's
You can
certain.
just say yes and I'm good. I know there's.
Well,
a lot of
I think
people
there's
here.
some people want to know why, and this question has come up a few times, and I know some people are more satisfied with our answer than others, and that's fine, right? Our research told us at Finn 2 things. One, we cannot qualify for the state grant. If any sort of money we spend in Finn, we don't get any state money. So we, as a town, can do whatever we want to do to Finn and propose whatever we want to propose at Finn whenever we want, but it's not part of the state grant process. So for
Needs to be on this parcel.
this, or we could have done something at Woodward, which is obviously a very tight parcel. So we had eligibility to do anything with grades 2 through 5 at those 2 parcels. That was the scope of that. We can at any point in time, and this is why I want to make sure everyone's clear, we can at any point in time choose not to partner with the state and do our own thing.
Sure.
But we as taxpayers would be paying 100% of whatever gets proposed.
I was sure you'd look.
The reason we did not go out into the fields at Finn is they're actually protected parkland. So that's what town council told us. There's been a significant amount of money spent by the Community Preservation Act on that parcel. Most recently with pickleball, there's lights for baseball, and there's been improvements over the years. So we would have had to stay within the existing footprint of Finn. But again, we have heard a lot about the cost of this project, and we understand that no one wants to pay anything, right? Like, I don't think anyone wants their tax bills to go up. So we had to find what we thought was the happy medium. That's why I think the superintendent used the word preferred, right? Was kind of how we ended up back here.
Can I go on, folks, or? You talked a lot, and I thought it was really very eloquent the way you talked about the benefits of a community and building a community. I've had people, other conversations that I've had, talk about community schools, where within one building you have pre-K to 5. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that's not viable for Southborough.
I think we have some. So part of the work with MSBA was to submit enrollment, and then from that enrollment, really thinking about what are we trying to accomplish. So in that work, the decision was made to have an early childhood center, pre-K through 1, and then a 2 through 5 school. The 2 through 5 school is what MSBA set us to study and learn more about. Could the town of Southborough look at building a larger pre-K through 5 elementary school? Yes, but we'd have to.
2 is what I was thinking, right?
Or 2.
Have Finn be pre-K through 5 and in this new building, wherever we put it, or wherever.
Yeah, so again, there's a lot of variations and iterations that could be. That's not something we studied. Part of the reason why we looked at this particular model, consolidating to, from 2 schools to 1, is really also to maximize resources. In our design, in our programming, the people resources that we have to educate students, there is some inefficiencies in the way that we are staffed as a result of having 2 buildings. So part of the thinking is really having some efficiencies and maximizing staff in 1 building. We also thought a lot about kind of an early childhood center. That has been a model in Southborough for a number of years. And we think that the unique needs of students age 3 through 6 are really unique and serve the community well. So that's why we stayed with that particular model. But any iteration that you can think of is potentially a possible solution. Again, we studied a lot of options, and this was the preferred solution that the Neary Building Committee studied, working with MSBA.
I mean, I'll agree. My kids went through K1 at Finn, then 2-3 at Woodward, but then Woodward got rebuilt. So then they were, I don't even know where they were. And then they went to Neary, and then one went on to Trotter, and one went, I actually had to take her to a charter school in Framingham because the whole SPED thing just didn't work for us. She had dyslexia. But anyway, thank you, and so I think the less buildings for a family to have to drive to, and the kids to transition, that's headed in the right direction. You didn't point out elevators. I'm just wondering how many elevators you got, and how many people want an elevator at a time.
Yeah, so if we, who has the, so I can.
Greetings all, sorry, I'm doing my baseball practice. There is one elevator.
Just one?
Yep, just one. Goes up in the middle of the building, just about where the music rooms are, in that sort of teal next to the cafeteria. I don't know if your pointer will work. And typically, we haven't really talked about operationally, but typically elevators are used for students who need it, or faculty who need it, not necessarily used by the entire population, which was one of the reasons to have those stairs, which are trying to be open and spaces of movement, because there's a lot of kids coming and going. So typically we're not trying to say that kids are going up and down the elevator all day long.
No, I understand. But I'm assuming that you have some standard ratio of, for 600 kids, you need this many elevator trips a day or something. That's all factored in.
Yes, in the general terms, but it typically is one. I can think of one very large school we put in 2 elevators.
Okay.
And just as an example, the high school, I believe, has 2 elevators. And so if you think about Algonquin, is about double the size that this would be in terms of number of students, and it has 2 elevators.
Just seems light when you think about being adaptable and flexible.
Mm.
Anyway. How many, in the picture you show like 3 chairs in the hallway. Yeah, I know you don't call it a hallway.
Yeah.
That's not realistic, right? You're gonna have, if you're gonna have 600 kids going up and down these hallways, you're not gonna have 3 chairs for them to fight over.
Yeah.
That is a great question. No, that is just to get a sense of the space, and we've looked at a lot of different designs of ways that we could do flexible, movable furniture in the Learning Commons so that you can configure and reconfigure. But yes, there would definitely be more than 3 chairs.
And I'll just comment too, the design of the academic wings is that the people traveling in the academic wing for a grade level are the students in that grade level. So it's not, you're not going to have traffic from another grade level walking through a 5th grade academic wing, for example.
Fair enough. Although, right now, is it 8 classes per grade,
Correct.
basically?
It is. There's, on the upstairs, 2 of those classes are potentially world language classrooms. And then on the lower floor, 2 of those classes are special education programs. But we also designed it so like the world language classrooms, we have flexibility as enrollment is changing so that there's the possibility of 8.
So but it's safe to assume that it's a flexible enough design that when they build all of those buildings down by the MBTA station, this grade will have 3 and that one will have 6, and right?
Yes, we typically we have about 7 classes per grade level, and with our enrollment projections, it appears that that's about where we'll stay. We sometimes go to 6, we sometimes go to 8,
Yeah.
and our projections suggest that that's the range we would be in for the foreseeable future.
Okay, and you may have ruled this question out of context for this meeting, but I looked at the stuff online and it talked about if we grow a lot, we could add more wings. I was just curious where the other wings would go.
Yeah, so Larry, do you want to talk about the expansion plan?
You all still okay? I'm gonna be respectful here,
Yeah, no, I appreciate those questions. So the MSBA does ask us to consider how a school could expand.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a plan to expand it, but in our case, we have looked at essentially building a 4th or 3rd wing across. So rather than having a open U-shaped building, we would actually have a courtyard. And so going from the 2 stairs at the end and coming across there with 3 classrooms per floor would give us the ability to have an additional 6 classrooms if it was necessary. But at the moment, there's no expectation that that would happen in the near future.
2 stories, 6 each.
2 stories, 3 each, 6 total.
Okay. How many kids per class in these are you designing for?
So the class size policy, so grade 2 is up to 20. Grades 3 through 5, the maximum is 22.
But the classes are all the same size?
Correct.
And then those little pink rooms for the special education, they hold like 3 kids or?
4 to 6.
4 to 6.
Do they have windows in them or?
So the idea is that they have doors, sliding doors that can go open into each of the classrooms, and then a door out into the center hallway. So they don't have daylight windows, but on the other hand, they're not used continuously for long periods of time. The kids sort of go in and out is the idea.
And I was more worried about kids, walking kids inside.
You
You
can
know,
leave
being-
the doors open.
Yeah.
Huh?
You can leave the doors open.
Or closed so that
Yes.
a
Yes.
kid's sitting
Yes.
there, they need the privacy. I mean, kids are cruel, right? And, you know, creating an aquarium with the special education kids in there is not a good idea,
I mean, one of the things we did is we looked at these spaces with the support from Arrow Street is they show us the lines of sight from every place into or out of the classrooms,
I think. Yeah.
which teachers, want to know. What would my line of sight be to the small group room, to kids in the learning
Of
commons?
course.
So that is a consideration.
And parents too, I think.
Yes?
And my kids are out of school, I should just say. The parent meetings for, I forget what
Special education meeting?
they're in that room down front.
Mhm.
When you talk about it, I was just wondering if you could give a couple examples of the flexibility and technology plan for 40 years, I think you said. What does that look like in your planning?
So I can start, and then others feel free to jump in. But currently, as over time, we have one type of technology in one space, and then that one might break down, and so you replace that and have a projector there, and then in another space, it gets replaced at a different point in time, and you have a large sort of screen in that room. And so right now, when you go from room to room, you could have a different technology set up in every room and require different plugs and different ways to connect. So as an educator, if you're moving from room to room, or if whether it's for professional development or working with kids, it's not seamless. It's not easy to walk into another space and have the technology up and running. So some of this is about bringing it to sort of, the state of the art and being able to have that seamless connections and access and projection in all the spaces. But I don't know if the principals or Greg want to add anything.
No, I would just add that we can't predict what it's going to look like in 40 years.
Yeah.
So part of the thinking really is, how do we design the spaces with simplicity? So there's a lot of flexibility. So not overcomplicate the spaces that we create. And the library is an example where, what will the library space in the future look like? So rather than having a lot of fixed bookshelves, like having a lot of mobile bookshelves, so we can use that space and adapt that space as our understanding of libraries change. That's the type of thinking that we did. I think we know technology is going to change. And really, how can we use the spaces that we have for whatever technology is emerging?
I think that's really important, and I hope that, I'll just kind of throw it out there and you don't have to answer, but I hope you build in a place where you could put some, like a data center, because with AI, it would be great if the kids' data kind of stayed in the building and little AI agents ran there, but it didn't all leak out to the scary people in the world. I'm assuming somewhere there's lockers and cubbies for kids in the classrooms. You could just say yes, and that's good enough for me.
Yes.
Okay. And then my last question. Oh, actually, I already asked this. How you were going to expand it, and you answered it. Thank you so much. And again, I really do want to thank you, Mr. Wanowski, because I know you've been working on this for years and years and years, and the whole team for putting in the time and for all of your patience for letting me ask my questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
Tim Woodland Road. I thought I'd jump in on the technology question because I've watched technology and been part of technology transitions for over 50 years now. So that's sort of the time scale you're talking about here. And I'll say that the thing that most gets you in technology transitions is not the device that you put on the desk or you try and use. It's the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
It's the cabling. It's the stuff that says, gee, back when when I started, nothing was connected, and you plugged into the wall, and that's all you needed. And then, well, there was thick wire Ethernet and twisted pair Ethernet, and those all being replaced by coaxial cable. Fiber would be nice. The world is going wireless. If you're serious about technology and technology flexibility, there's an awful lot of niggling little details and things that can either be made expensive or not. I mean, if you have to drag a new wire, and it means opening the wall because you didn't, include conduit. And there's a whole collection of infrastructure, whether it's that or you talked about 1970s power. Well, I remember when 1970s power was new, but the amount of power that you need in a room, is changing too. So it's not as simple as one might think to have the flexibility that you're looking for. I mean, I think about the only thing that's stayed more or less constant is projection screens, but even those are being replaced by LED displays, and so you have sort of that challenge to look at. The other thing I'll also comment on, somewhat along the lines of the previous speaker, is the accessibility is one of the things I've worried about for a long time. And there's clearly a set of program level decisions that say, well, on the one hand you want privacy and the ability to focus on people, and on the other hand you don't want to have people who are isolated. And you heard this sort of made fun of, but it's more than that. And it's not clear to me that you can solve that simply with space.
Hello, I'm Dean Webster to 24 Overlook Drive. I thought at the beginning of your presentation you made some interesting remarks about the value of sort of teaching communities, and the point about every 2 years the kids are either joining the school or getting ready to leave it, and some of the sort of social and work challenges that presents as kids are constantly having to adjust to a new building. I felt in terms of illustrating the value of what you're presenting here, which looks very interesting, it might be useful to remind the community of what the current situation is. In that if the staff are having to go for hopping from school to school, give us a slide that shows us that. Because you made that point at the very beginning, it sounds like that was a high value solution that you're looking for, and I think illustrating the problem more clearly between the current schools. And I can think of, my wife was always complaining that I missed my kids growing up because I was traveling so much. But if you've got a young family with 2 or more children a year apart, mum's dropping her off at one school and then hopping to the next and so on. So there could be lots of benefits in the community, both for the children, the parents, and the staff who are looking to provide coaching and mentoring, as you were describing, that would be of higher value if you've got them in a consistent location.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hello, Andrea Giancanteri, 129 Woodland Road. I'm the product of a K through 12 school. I don't recommend it. I would have done anything to change schools a couple of times in my educational experience. And so with that, I will say where I grew up is no longer a K through 12. They split into 2 different schools, leveraging forecasts that were blatantly incorrect, leaving the schools, only fractionally full, or small percentage full. Now we're operating 2 schools in that community. It's actually a nightmare for the taxpayers, and it's not working out well for the students at all, and it's lowered the grading of the school, and that happened in a number of different areas. My understanding is the forecasts used to develop Algonquin as a model were also flawed, and that school has never reached the forecasted student population that was used. So I'd like to understand how the forecasts used to propose this school are accurate, how that makes sense, and I'm not questioning the data, I'm just saying I want to see something not happen where I grew up, happen here where I'm now a homeowner and a taxpayer. So I'm curious about that.
I will start. Greg can certainly weigh in. And the reason I'm going to start is this is where we were 5 years ago, trying to figure out what the actual enrollment was. I was not a taxpayer or a resident of Southborough when Southborough decided to do what we're now all sitting in. And I would say we fell into that trap. Right? No, and I mean that with all due respect, I've said this to everyone, is we actually relied on projections we had at the time. What we now know 25 years later is that we were at the peak of Southborough public schools enrollment, and it dropped significantly and very quickly, and we've been very consistent for a very long period of time. So what we did on the school research subcommittee started 5 years ago. It took us 2 years to do our work. We actually worked with 2 different demographers, right, that actually understand how this works. One is a group that the town/district had worked with forever, right, and there's a regular enrollment package that goes to the school committee on a monthly basis. One was just someone completely fresh, new to the process. They didn't have real access to that. There was 2 independent processes. The numbers came out roughly the same. And if you kind of I'm just going to use, for anyone, I'm going to assume everyone's not numerically inclined, just to make this easy late at night. But if you kind of think about it, on the average, every classroom's about 20 kids. It takes 20 kids per grade, right, to be off one classroom section. So we were doing this during COVID, right? So you want to talk about a lot of fluctuation and all of that going on, right? Like how many people that were quote unquote empty nesters sold their 4-bedroom homes in the community to, in most instances, not all instances, families that were moving in with some sort of school-aged child. Well, here's what we learned. Not everyone's filling the 4-bedroom homes anymore. There's still plenty of people that move in with 3, 4, potentially more kids. There's a lot of 1 and 2 child homes. So now how you play that all forward, we're now roughly 5 years beyond the start of COVID. We continue to have looked at the data at every point in time during this. The state also did their own study on our enrollment as part of this, and came within, we were like roughly plus or minus 5 students per year per grade. Again, it takes 20 to move the needle in any one year. And just to use this year as an example, there's one grade that has 6 sections and one that has 8 sections, and they're 1 year apart, right? And that seems to be the trend we're going in, is we have a bubble year and then we dip. So how do we as a building committee get comfortable with all of this? There's a lot of critiques about the project. We haven't heard too much saying you're building too much. And if any don't agree with that, I'd love to hear that. But that's like, we understand there's a lot of different views, but that's not one. And when we look at what other communities are wrestling with as they build these schools, there's a debate of they're moving into schools and they're already, too small or they're way too big. I think we have enough data to say we're building what's just right.
So you think there will be lots of planning?
Yeah, we hope, right? But again, if we're wrong, if I can tell you, there's no way we're overbuilding. We've had 6 to 7 sections of each of these grades we're talking about for 20 years, roughly, right? The population's not going to magically move out of Southborough, of school-aged children, given the quality of the academics that's here. So what I'm worried about, right, is did we cut it too close, right? But go to Mr. Hitton's comment, we have a plan in the future, but why are we going to build something now that we know we don't need now? I don't want to ever come back to taxpayers, but if you came back to the taxpayers in the future, if this project were to pass, what we're going to be looking at is we should have data at that point in time for whoever's bringing it forward that says our student enrollment spiked and something happened. maybe it's MBTA communities, maybe it's just something else that happens. But we're building to what we know now, not saying, oh, let's just round up a significant amount. Full disclosure, all enrollment has about a 5 to 10% contingency in it. So we are, do have some buffer. Do you like to ask the question?
I just want to make sure you're assuming that you're going to close, when you say you're not building too much, that's assuming we retire Finn, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we would not propose a 4th-grade school if we weren't closing one. This is a personal view. I'm sure some committee members share it. My wife and I did a lot of research when we moved to Southborough. I will tell you, we did not realize there were 3 elementary schools and that our kids were going to be changing all 3 years. I'm the perfect example that was actually referenced earlier. My kids have each one of these principals this year. We're in that perfect window where we have one in every school, and we've been doing that for a couple of years now. And by the way, my kids will be, will live through all of this and then move on. We'll be basically in Trotter by that point and beyond. So I think when we take a step back, we basically didn't want to, on year 2 versus 4, we didn't want to continue to compound and have to maintain 3 different buildings over time. And there wasn't consensus on our committee at first. There was significant debate. We're unanimous now, but the only way we got there was really by saying we have to go to 2 elementary schools, because even if we invested in Finn now, you're going to be looking at a significant cost without the state. And if we just decided to build 2-grade at Neary and just continued on with this 2-grade model, we're going to be looking at something significant. If we want Finn to remain a school, not open as a building, but to remain a school, somewhere between 5, 10, or 15 years, depending upon the features you're looking at, that was part of it. So yes, we are assuming that there would be one closing, otherwise we would never be proposing a 4th-grade school. So I just want to make sure I answered her question, Greg, before you go. Did I answer your question?
I guess.
Okay. Is there any clarification we can provide?
No, I don't research this, so I didn't.
Okay. Both demographic studies should be out there if you need them or updated, but
They're on the website.
yeah. All right, sorry, Greg, go ahead.
No, I was just going to reiterate the point that the partnership with MSBA is they bring a wealth of experience and process. So before, I think the MSBA process has been modernized, I think the early 2000s. A lot of the facilities that MSBA was a different name that were built were oversized, overbuilt. And I think the work that MSBA did was to make sure that we were building right size facilities for cities and towns. And they have a demographic team that spends a lot of time during eligibility to make sure that it's comfortable partnering with the community with the demographics and the enrollment projections. So that 610 number and the 305 number for 4 and 5 was agreed upon with MSBA's demographic team. And that was outside of the RLS demographic report we did and NASDAQ's report. So we had triangulation, which is always good when we're looking at trends and patterns.
Bonnie Van, 179 Mill Road. First, thank you all for what you're doing. There's no doubt we have to do something. It's a matter of making a decision. It's really 2 questions. If you could go to the slide which shows the schematic of the interior of the building. That's the first bullet, doesn't matter. The occupancy of the gym, and the reason I asked that, or even the band room, I have a whole orchestra living in my backyard, thanks to all of you. And I appreciate it, they're great. But what's the occupancy? Because that age group, the parents are very involved. And are we going to be able to have small concerts with grandparents and parents in that room at the same time?
Yeah, so I think that the 610 enrollment, also the spaces, so the gymnasium, the cafeteria, the music spaces also are aligned with that level of occupancy. So it would allow for parents to observe their kids playing basketball, or having a whole school meeting in the gymnasium, or if we have a concert in the cafeteria, we wouldn't be able to house the whole school, but we could house 2 grade levels, for example, and their families.
But if the school decides to hold a in-school gathering, 610 students and the faculty can safely be in those spaces?
Correct.
Okay. And I assume the first floor, I don't have my glasses, so I apologize. I assume the first floor is second and third?
We haven't had that conversation.
That's all right.
Most, that's one possible iteration.
The reason I ask, if you go to the second floor, what's the distance that a student would have to walk to the cafeteria? How would they get there? I know there's an elevator, because you pointed that out, but where's the stairwells?
So this stairs, what? So right in this, the yellow main corridor,
Yes.
you'll see the label open to below, and then you'll see 2 set of stairs there. That's one egress, and then on the back of each of the wings, you'll see a set of stairs. So the second floor students can also go down a floor and then walk toward the cafeteria.
Okay.
Larry, do we know the approximate distance?
I knew there was going to be one question somebody asked that. I wouldn't remember
No, the
that.
reason I asked that, if there's an event with that particular age group, whether it be Colonial Day or whatever, I've been to 20 years of them. And at my age, and others of my age, one elevator or walking to that hallway, up or down, for a student activity, that's a long distance. So I would really like you to look into the possibility of a second elevator for that reason, or at least how we would get there if necessary, or an event that might take place on that floor. I don't need an answer tonight, but I would definitely look at that.
Are you asking if there's more elevator capacity for visitors to the school or for students?
I think there needs to be more access for visitors to the school, because at times that elevator could be unavailable for use. I was on the 88th, so I would look at
Redundancy.
the need, potential need.
And I think if you go to the perspective view we had earlier, the question about the balcony, you can see how those stairs work.
They look like a ramp.
You need a better driver.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Somewhere there, I knew we had it.
Okay.
There we go. So you see there is the sort of stair, and the idea is that it's open and visible, and it's not behind walls and doors, so that it's an inviting way for students to move up and down through the building, encouraging them to walk rather than thinking about elevators. But to your point, appreciate that.
I'm talking about the population that may be coming to the school to see an event that will take place
Sure.
in the school. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thanks.
It's me again. So if there's consolidation, have you done any reports or on savings and transportation?
So sorry, feedback. We do feel, do you want to answer this?
Yes, thank you, Greg, and thanks for the question. That has come up a few times. It's not necessarily going to result in a reduction of the number of buses we need, but what it's going to create is a lot more efficiency. having to go to multiple schools, which Mr. Malinowski has had to bounce between, is really where we're making those gains. But we still need to, still pick up the same number of children. But what we're going to find is that the bus routes are going to be more efficient and they're going to be shorter, and it's just going to be overall a better experience because we have one less place to drop. We have done projections on that, and it's averaging between 15 to 20 minutes per bus. So we are knowing we're going to get that efficiency.
And I would also add that in that efficiency, the amount of time we have to pay drivers. So if instead of 8 hours, it might be 6.5 hours. So there is some savings there that we anticipate achieving.
And I'm just going to pile on. They clearly talked about the time, but we've put out some operational savings amounts at this point. We have not included anything for busing. So it would be like incremental, because we don't feel like, especially the district just signed a new contract, and there's questions about whether they decide to do their own busing, short-term or long-term. So we didn't feel comfortable committing to a savings level, so we have not quantified that in what we've already put out there in terms of savings.
Hi, my name is Kayla, 52 Oregon Road. So please let me know if this is not for this meeting here, or if it's on the website, maybe I missed it. But if this plan is to move forward, during the time of construction, I know that there was previously mentioned having students at the site, and then that was changed. So do those displaced students go to Finn and Woodward, and is there room? How does that affect like those years?
Sure, great question. And let me just move to a slide, hang on. So this was really important for us to make sure that there's integrity of experience while students are at whatever grade level they're at. Students are only in first grade once. So our job is to make sure that that's the best possible first grade experience that we can deliver to that student. So that was a commitment. There was some conversation, as Jason had mentioned, around do we build in a different location so we can keep the building open, and then what we decided was it just wasn't safe to have students on a construction site. It was too disruptive, and we developed kind of a relocation plan, and I'll let Keith talk about kind of the details of that plan.
Yeah, sure, thank you. This slide does outline things well for that. So the whole idea is that we wanted to maintain the integrity of the experience, and we wanted students to remain in their school that they know one more year. So the whole idea was to bring the condensing down. What I would say is that, and we worked on this last summer, this team to my right here, really investigating what was feasible. We know it's possible. But there are going to be things that have to be fragmented and programmatically adjusted so that we're able to make this happen. The other benefit that this brings is that if we were still keeping Neary open and constructing adjacent to it, the construction period would be extended significantly, which will bring up the cost. So we're not only reducing the time by being off-site, we're also reducing the cost of that overall, and there were projections related to that. But still, the focus was not on that. It was about what kind of experience could we provide the students. So what we've developed by even outlining this plan that's up on the screen now is really digging deep. So each of the principals have devised a relocation team that is currently investigating all the different things they have to consider, everything from schedule to actual spaces, looking at the floor plans, really mapping it out. We've also made a commitment that during construction there will be modular classrooms at both facilities, Finn and Woodward, to accommodate that. And those are the questions that we're digging in while we're hoping for the approval of this project. But I know that we'll probably spend this summer digging deeper into that. What's been great is we've engaged the teachers in the process, and that has really allowed us to have them start thinking, because it's not just the four of us that are going to be making these decisions. We're going to be making these decisions as a community for the benefit of the kids, and there have been phenomenal questions brought up. Storage has always been a topic, for example, so we are reaching out to Trotter, working with Principal Hershek here to make sure he can accommodate some of the needs of this transition. So it's going to be a holistic approach, and we're going to really burrow into those details as soon as we can get going. And the goal would be to have it outlined and communicated with full transparency as soon as it's ready. And then if all goes well, we would be starting construction in June of '26. So that would be the time where we would really be digging in, and then students would start in September of '26 in the relocation plan. So that's what we have. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Did you have a follow-up?
Not really a follow-up. I'm sure you, these are things you're already thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just thinking of my kids who are, one's in kindergarten and one's will be in kindergarten in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And just making sure that they're not missing out during that time, that they're
Yes.
not losing art classes or losing space in the gym, or if special ed classes, OT, speech, all those things that are available now and so amazing at our schools, that they're not taken away for those 2 years while this is happening. if that
It will
makes
not,
sense.
and that was really the goal of that feasibility review, to make sure that those things specifically would not be fractured. So that would be continuous, and that experience would be at the core of it.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Keith. The only thing I would add is that the relocation plan does include adding 2 modular classrooms at Finn and at Woodward during this transition, so that we still can have integrity of space. So we're not compromising our art program or our music program. So that is part of the plans and part of the cost that we brought forth to the voters on May 10th.
Sorry. During the transition period, the start time of school will be the same? I pick up 3 students, that's why I'm curious.
It will be simplified. So right now we have
So Algonquin's gonna move to Southborough?
no. So not simplified across the 10 schools we're responsible for, but in Southborough, obviously, we would have 1 less start time, Neary, and we'd be able to have, the 2 elementary schools would be staggered, but it again would make parent pickup and drop off a bit easier in terms of if you have kids across
But
those
the
3
parents
grades.
would be made aware of that way in advance as far as what the new start times may be and what school configurations would be on those buses before that, starting 2026?
Yes, so 26, 27.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just had one follow-up on this too. So looking at this slide, obviously it suggests that for 2 years, the principals are all comfortable with the addition, I guess, of adding 2 modular classrooms, that all the kids will fit. Would that not be true 4 years from now, 6 years from now? It seems like we're building a lot more than 2 classrooms for 2 schools as part of this process. Or is my mind just getting around it right?
Well, remember, we're also proposing to decommission a space too, right? So,
Right, but
like
you're
long
doing
term,
that
like,
in these
so,
2 years.
yeah, so you're saying, why can't we just do this in perpetuities? Like, is that basically what the question is?
Basically, I'm saying if you can fit them in those 2 buildings now, because that's just next year, can't you fit them in those 2 buildings 3 years from now, 5 years from now?
So we know this, this population is already pretty much in the schools, or is known because they're all old at this point, right? Yeah, so Woodward's gonna be incredibly tight. We're basically right up against the building occupancy permit, with, I'll call it the known students. Finn is a slightly larger school, right? So but it will still be, because you have the pre-K aspect too, and it's just Southborough. I know there's talk of why Northborough's there as well. So it will be, both buildings are gonna be tight, right? That's why we need the modulars. The modulars are $2 million. It's not cheap, it's in our pricing, so we don't think it's a sustainable plan. And to the comment that was
2 million once or 2 million?
2 million for the
a year?
2-year period.
So $1 million each year,
Yeah.
which is still a long way from 68.
Yep. Yeah, but you also have to think about the thing about, yes, it is from a cost perspective, but there are things that none of us can sit here and quantify in terms of cost, in terms of the education. That's the decision the community needs to make, right? That is really what we're asking.
Thank you.
Jason, if I could just add to that. So through the transition planning process, we have to make certain sacrifices around space. So prioritizing the classroom space is obviously most important for us. So that will then mean other specialists or other services are then displaced for a short-term period. I would not be comfortable having 3 grades at Woodward School indefinitely. I think looking at this, it's short-term sacrifices for long-term gains. That's how I'm approaching this. I think when we look at some of our larger spaces, we're going to be chopping them up quite a bit and making sure that multiple educators can be in one space. And I'm not talking classrooms, but more so special education staff or additional services so that they can work with students in private areas, but they're going to feel much smaller because we're just trying to fit more people into the building.
Sorry, when does I get up to speed? Laura Vaughn, 198 Woodland Road. I think to your point that you just made, obviously this is a community decision, and I think probably the last thing that most people in this room want to consider is that the school's not approved. And I guess my question is, if the town votes the new school down, what is the plan? Is there a plan? I guess that's where I'm unclear.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are unclear because we seem to have a new school or do what?
Yeah, so I think we have to work with, I'll call it small time frames, right? And as a reminder, there's 2 votes, right? And it is certainly possible that one goes one way and one goes the other, and they could be out of order potentially too. What we have committed to as a building committee, and remember, we as a building committee, and none of us in this room can actually call another town meeting, right? Only the select board can call a town meeting. So, well, I hope that's not the answer. Obviously, we have to think about that as a plausible thing. Here's how I think it would go down. If there was a no vote on either the ballot question or a town meeting, I would think the Neary Building Committee, the select board, the school committee would have some sort of open public meeting. I would think a lot of it would depend upon the margin of a vote and whether both votes failed or one vote failed. What the MSBA requires us to do, we're in a 180-day funding window. That funding window starts on April 30th, which is hence some of the gymnastics we've done with the timing. I don't think any of us can commit what the next step would be. It would be how do we want to use the 180 days we have with the state. Obviously, if we get to a point where the select board decides not to call another special town meeting and the town meeting vote had failed as an example, I think you're looking at a different building committee and you're looking at what can Southborough afford on their own, and how does that then match up with the educational vision and the planning that's taken 4 to 5 years to get to this. It would bring every option, candidly, back to the table. And I would also remind everyone that everything that we have done as a committee and the predecessor committees was not behind closed doors. We had to do it in public, right? So we feel like we've done the 5 years of vetting, and I think having volunteered for the town long enough, you realize that there's always going to be dissent, and that's okay, and that's healthy. And I think we would just have to reframe where we go. But I think we have to decide first how we're using the 180 days we have in this funding window, because we've spent 4 years getting through that funding process. I will also answer your question with, a reminder that we looked at not partnering with the state back in 2021, 2022. We thought the risk was so great that we would be leaving too much potential money on the table, such that any project, no matter how well thought out, how supported in the community, the natural question would have been, well, you left free money on the table, we're just not going to support it. So it has been a balancing act the entire time. But unfortunately, it's not one person, one committee that can commit to that next step, because it takes a series of committees to have that discussion. But I think we honestly don't know what's gonna happen until we see who shows up at town meeting and who shows up at the polls. And we think that that's where we need to start.
Sure. And I totally understand, and I get the focus has been on a yes vote. I think that leaves a lot of uncertainty and confusion for voters who might be undecided, like my husband and I, to say, if we place a no vote, what does this mean for the education system, the schools, the configurations of that, the renovations to Neary, is that the next step? Like, I feel like that's just a wide open door that no one has really put any thought or consideration to. So when I'm making this decision as a yes voter, I clearly know what I'm getting. As a no voter, I don't understand the implications of that.
So let me answer it a little differently. Let's just assume we lose our 180-day funding window for a second, right? Let's just say we're beyond that MSBA process.
Sure,
Right, can you go back?
That's what I was
Yeah,
asking.
okay. So let's assume that we've decided we're not going forward with the plan that's up there.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few things you would have to look at, right? I know folks want to look at using this building for 5th grade as an example. I acknowledge that. That's been looked at before, right? The school administration has a very strong view of that. Of course, I think there's general consensus that we are at the end of Neary, and I have heard very few, not none, but very few people say we should continue to operate that as a 2-grade school for the next 5 to 10 years. So I think that's the one general consensus I think most people have come to in this, but again, please keep me honest. I think we would have to revisit everything, and I think hopefully more people would show up. One of our biggest disappointments in this entire process has been the lack, right? This is about this is like a good audience for us. There's a few people that have been here throughout the whole process, and really some of you come in and come out. We try, right? And that's like what like hurt, like when we think about this project, regardless of whether, even if it passes, right? Like, the amount of community engagement was limited at certain points, but it's not because it was a backroom deal, right? Or someone's agenda. Like, I hope that's very clear to everyone that it was 7 residents trying to put their heads together with experts, both ones that you all employ as taxpayers and ones that we've hired, and then working with the state. So I think you'd have to look at the grade configuration again. I think you'd have to say Neary would have to close at some point, and how long was that temporary plan actually sustainable? And to the extent we have any sort of boom in our population, just even temporarily, all of Mr. Muji's concerns become that much greater. I think you also then have to acknowledge, if we really want to close Neary and not do anything on that site for whatever reason, you have to acknowledge that Finn is really not that far behind. And I realize some people would just, if this project was at Finn, it would completely change their vote. We've heard that already. But we don't have the luxury. So think about the plan we're doing. We don't have the luxury of closing Finn for 2 years and moving the students out. We can't do this in reverse order. So I think it has to have some acknowledgement that Finn is going to need a lot of attention, whether it just be trying to keep it a 2 to 3 grade school, or whether it be people like the 4 grade option, they just don't like the site. And then I think needs to be a general acknowledgement that putting a 2 grade elementary school where Woodward was, we can actually expand that. I wouldn't want to be a neighbor on the back side of that, right? But we could expand that, and that is an option that was one of our 12 options that we looked at. So I think we'd have to look at it again. But we also need to remember the story of our neighbors. One town over, that were looking at a public safety facility at the same point in time back in 2017. We decided as voters to go forward with ours. We got it for 19.6 million of cost. We bought some land too that has made the town some money as well. I realize there's competing views on a town owning a golf course, but we accomplished it for under $25 million. Our neighbors are building a fire station only for over $40 million right now. And by the way, they've had a school come in the next year, right? So, Northborough. So, none of this is gonna get any cheaper, and none of it is gonna happen in less than 2 to 3 years, no matter how fast any sort of committee that forms wants to do it. So that's the opportunity cost. When people take a step back and think about, forget about tariffs for a second, okay? Just think about normal, run-of-the-mill inflation. Let's just all agree things go up 4 to 5% a year in normal sort of conditions. That's what we would be fighting against at a bare minimum. And then we live in a state that has very strict procurement laws that make it even tougher in terms of the type of labor we have to hire, the type of contracts we have to do. We could all put our money together and build the school for far less if we weren't governed by some of that, but that's just, again, the state we live in. So I think that's how I could see it working. I have ideas, but I don't think I would be speaking as an individual, and I don't think it would be appropriate to do that at this point, because I think our best ideas have been formulated over a 5-year period with the help of truly experts. And for those that didn't listen to our meeting with the select board last week, one of the things we've heard 2 outside comments throughout this project that really have actually, I'm not going to say 3, sorry, and I know I've given you a very long-winded answer.
No, I appreciate it. This is,
so, but this is our thought process. This is what we've been talking about. Well, no one wants to come to our meetings. But the first thing we heard was one of the first things we had to do with the state is get acceptance of like the 12 options we were going to look at. But most of that had been the educational plan. When we went to this state meeting, this one individual on the state board, so the MSBA, went on for at least 5 minutes about the quality of the educational plan. We also hear no one that's complaining about the quality of our schools in the town, right? I realize everyone has different experiences depending on their children's needs, but they went on and on, okay? They actually did like some of the design first too, right? I'm just, I'm a very honest person, anyone that knows me. So they beat up Larry for a little bit, and then they went right back to the education. So I think you need to understand, like that's an important part of how we as a committee have at least thought about the project. Comment number 2 came pretty recently. The state likes the design, by the way, so now people think about that stuff, and they're talking about the efficiency of the building. Our buildings right now are completely inefficient, right? The only reason we can accommodate some of these grades is any of the principals, your gyms aren't full on like every period, every day, right? Like there's sometimes the gyms are empty, right? Now the gyms are going to be fully utilized at all periods, which is how you should use, a public asset. So we've heard a lot about the efficiency of the program, but then as kind of the capstone of how some of the outside feedback we've received has been, is it keeps coming back to the education. And they keep talking about how Southborough is thinking about it, not only for the short term, but the long term. They don't have to tell us this. They don't have to give us this feedback, but those are outside perspectives. And the comment that really resonated with me is, and I'm not going to say who said it, but it was an outside person that didn't have to say it, is they said most districts, the superintendent and their teams, they have one plan, and it's their plan or the highway. I can tell you that's not, right? You've seen how our numbers have come down, right? We've gotten lucky with some additional reimbursement, but they have worked with the committee to get to consensus. I'm sure they would all build a very different building if they didn't have to deal with the fact that you have to go seek public funding, right? Like if they could just design it and have a blank check, of course it would look a lot different. It would look a lot bigger. And I want you to also understand that that's been part of our process too, is it's a huge cost. I don't care what your income is, right? Like it's a huge cost even if you can pay your tax bill comfortably. And I don't think that has been lost on anyone at the front table and anyone that's been part of the team, because we're trying to bring forward a responsible option so we're not all here in 10 to 15 to 20 years. I don't plan to go anywhere, but I don't want to be on another school building committee, is what is why we're trying to propose it the way we have. So I hope that helps answer your question. I think there are always going to be options, there are always going to be solutions, but I think you always have to have the right people in the room and the experts, that not only are the educators, not only the designers, people paying for it, and there's obviously a financial part of this. We have very good financial representation in our committee, but there's legal considerations, like all of that matters, and it's not just one person's vision, it's that collective view of how you get there.
Sure, great, thanks. Me again. So I think you anticipated my question, and it was going to be around tariffs and things that are potentially going to increase costs exponentially, or possibly 30% or something like that. How has that been, and forgive me if this has already been shared, but how have those kinds of things been anticipated? What's the plan there? It's kind of a volatile time from a materials perspective.
I mean, look, it changes every day, right? You know, we've been in this spot before, though. Ironically, when we voted the public safety building, we were up against the same exact thing. President Trump, in his first term, put tariffs in pretty much almost immediately when we were going up to bid. The good news is we're not putting any sort of material in let's just say it passes in both votes in May. It's going to take another year to fully design the building. There's permitting processes they're going to have to go through. There's a whole slew of things that would have to happen. We're going to have a lot more clarity on what that situation is. But let's just say it's not a good situation. What you as taxpayers are approving is the total project cost. And the MSBA has given us a number that they're going to reimburse based on all their rules and regulations on that total project cost. This is going to be new for anyone that even follows every word we've been saying. Last week we got a lot of similar type questions, and we acknowledged the uncertainty. Here's what has to happen. If our total project cost exceeds the 109 and change that we've quoted, we have to stop. We can't go forward. We have to go back to the MSBA, and it's a whole process. So the committee's not going to just be able to arbitrarily make decisions if this thing goes haywire because of tariffs or any other sort of economic factor. We could have a successful vote in the authority to move forward, but we can't go over that number. And we have to assume that we're going to get a certain reimbursement subject to kind of their financial audit. We also talked with the select board last week about policies around that. We actually don't even think we're going to need a policy now because the MSBA is going to stop us even if we wanted to keep going. And the good news, I would say, is we're not the only community that may be building a school, so it's going to have to be a much broader discussion than just Southborough. And I don't think anyone, no matter how in favor they are of the project or not, is going to continue down a path if something happens that is just so far out of anything we've seen, and it may mean you have to tweak something on the design. It may think you have to think about the timing of certain things. But I think what we also know, if we wait and bring the same thing, let's just say everyone was very supportive of most things in the project, and you bring it forward 3 years from now, because you're like, maybe things will be different and stabilize. There'll be something that none of us know that's coming, and inflation is still going to happen regardless of the tariffs. So while we need to think about it, we also have a contingency, right, that's already built into all the numbers. It's well over 12% at this point. $12 million of our 69 is actually contingency right now. It's 12 really million out of the 109, depending on how you want to look at the math, but that's, I think, an important factor.
This one's easy. Claire Reynolds, 104 Main Street. Thank you very much for all the work you've done. I mean, the number of meetings and everything that you have done, I don't think a lot of people really realize there's been a lot of thought that has gone into this, obviously. This is I've been a little remiss in terms of checking into all of this stuff, but this has really been an eye-opener for me. So, doing a good job. Thanks.
That wasn't even a question, so you were right, it was easy. Thanks, Claire.
I have one more, just a request of the experts. I've read in slides and stuff and heard people say 5th grade at Trotter is no good, and I'd forgotten all about it. But I never have heard why 5th grade at Trotter is no good. Could you just give us the elevator answer to that? So if we're sitting having a drink with somebody, we can say to them, well, they said it's not a good idea because.
Yes. Stephanie, go right ahead.
Okay, I will start and then Keith can jump in. So this is something that we studied in the past, and both Greg and Jason referred back to the studies that sort of launched this process. And there's a few different dimensions, so I'll name a few and Keith can speak very specifically to this building. One is that we know so in those studies, we did not recommend moving forward with 5 through 8. We know that in the past, developmentally, there is a big difference between a 5th grader and an 8th grader. And we have heard from the community when we had our elementary students on buses with middle school students, that that was not something that parents were in favor of. And so we have worked hard to rework our transportation so that they are not together. If we were to bring our 5th grade students to Trotter, although we could fit them in the building, we could not intentionally design what we described here of like learning neighborhoods. We couldn't have our 5th graders together as a pod or our 5th and 6th graders together and segmented from 7th and 8th grade. So developmentally, we couldn't create that sort of developmental environment for them. And our model for instruction and for curriculum is right now aligned K through 5. So and pre-K, but our K through 5 classrooms are one teacher teaching multiple subjects. And so students are with that teacher all day long. Those teachers are certified. They are certified typically either early childhood or they're certified through 6th grade. But they're certified as elementary teachers and they can teach math, English, social studies, science, and they have the students all day. When you move to 6th grade, our model is that our students are moving from classroom to classroom. They have a math teacher, they have a science teacher, they move to their social studies teacher, so there's a bell schedule. And every time the bell goes off, you've got the hallways full and the kids are all moving on to their next class, and our teachers are certified for that model. So our middle school teachers are certified by discipline 5 through 8. So you might be a math teacher 5 through 8 or an English teacher 5 through 8. So we lose flexibility in our staffing in the sense that we cannot take our 8th grade math teacher if we have enrollment changes and have them be a 5th grade teacher, because that 8th grade math teacher is a math teacher, but our 5th grade model is teachers teaching all subjects. Or we have to change our 5th grade model, but our 5th grade teachers are working with curriculum and resources that align to K through 4. So we use the same program for English language arts, K through 5. We use the same program for mathematics, K through 5. So our professional development, our collaboration for teachers, all our assessments are all aligned K through 5. And then we have different programs, 6 through 8. So we would not be intentionally able to, we would be fitting it in. And then there would be all of these disconnects. So that's a few of the pieces that I will speak to, and I'll let Keith jump in on some of the other impacts.
I think that was perfect, and it hits on a number of the things I was going to mention. I just want to make sure that would answer your question. If there was anything additional that you might want to know about.
Just give your background of why you're qualified.
Sure.
Why you're qualified.
And Keith, maybe
No, that's not important.
Keith, maybe add in about lunches and specials.
Sure, I was going to go into the operational side. So I've had the fortunate experience of being in the district for 25 years, and I started as a teacher here at Trotter in 2000, and then became an assistant principal and then principal up until 2020. This has come up a couple of times, and I think Stephanie and Jason and Greg have all said it well. Physically, the square footage of Trotter would allow for a greater number of students to be here. That's absolutely true. But what Stephanie said, which is very accurate, is the inability to really have a design structured for the type of learning that the grades would require. Not to mention, when we get into the logistical side of things, having to really build that type of programming, which would be appropriate for the grade levels, we would not have the space or the facility to do the things and the programmatic things that would really make it a genuine middle school experience. One of the examples I have is certainly the performing arts and the art rooms themselves. They are scheduled pretty fully now. And then if we were to add those additional grade with that additional type of curriculum, that would be very, very challenging to do, and there would be fragmentation to that would be unrecoverable. The other logistical thing that comes up, and the cafeteria was expanded in 2003, but I can tell you when Trotter was at its maximum of a grade level, 190 students, let's say, the cafeteria was insufferable. In fact, many students could not remain in the cafeteria, and we had to find alternative places for them to go. And that was for 1 or 2 years when we had 190 kids in a group. So it wouldn't be as simple as wedging the 5th grade into a 3 lunch wave. We would need a 4th lunch wave. And that 4th lunch wave would then be at 10 a.m. or at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which would be very challenging to operate. So I think Stephanie said some, perfectly put, educational purposes. There are also logistical challenges that would be unavoidable that we wouldn't be able to do. So I have talked to Principal Hershek about it on a number of occasions, what would be the types of things would be adjusted, and we are in agreement that the challenges would be very, very deep and large. Sure.
So just a couple of comments. First, there are districts who have 5 through 8. Many of the districts that I'm familiar with have designed it with intentionality.
Sorry.
So when you look at the schools that have 5 through 8, you see pods, you see 5 and 6 together in logical spacing, and then 7th and 8th. So if you were asking us, should 5th grade be at the middle school, and we were designing the school to meet the needs of those developmental kids, Trotter would not be the school we would design. So we could fit. It would be a solution for 5th grade to fit at Trotter, but it still doesn't solve the problem of what we would do with 4th grade. There's still not enough space at Woodward to have 4th grade permanently be in that school, and would require some addition, renovation of Woodward. But again, I think in 2021, with the evaluation of grade configurations, it was not recommended to move forward with studying 5th grade further, moving into Trotter.
I would just give you the feedback that I appreciate you trying to answer my question, but in all candor, it sounded like it'll be really hard for the teachers and principals, but it doesn't really kind of make that much difference for the kids. And I had a kid who was here during that peak year. I don't understand, so you didn't convince me in that regard. I'm not doing 5th grade in this building necessarily. I don't have an opinion, honestly. But I'll just give you that feedback.
That is helpful.
It would sound a lot better if you said 5th graders and 8th graders shouldn't be in the same restroom. Yeah. Right? I mean, something like that would be a lot easier for a simple mind like mine to get.
Yeah, that's helpful feedback, because that is the point, is we don't want 5th graders and 8th graders in sharing the bathroom, and we don't have a way to avoid it. If we put our 5th graders here, we don't want them at lunch together, and we can't avoid well, we can with a 10 o'clock lunch or 1 o'clock lunch. So that's great feedback. Thank you.
If I may, I think I can try and simplify your elevator answer. I think you described very clearly the need to maintain different social groups. Because you're talking about a totally different social dynamic between the middle school kids and the elementary kids and so on. And you don't, to the point, you don't even want them on the same bus. So that separation is the whole justification for why you want this building. Is it not? Or have I overseen something?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So that's it. That's the whole reason we're doing this. So that's the key of your presentation. There's some very high value messages coming.
Thank you, that's helpful. All right, so again, we truly appreciate your attendance this evening. I think part of our responsibility is to show up and ask questions and be informed. Our goal all along has been to try to make sure that people have good information, that their questions are answered, and that we are able to articulate the rationale for the preferred solution we're moving forward on May 10th. We don't get to decide how people vote, and that obviously we hope the project passes. That is all the work and thought that went into this. And I think the next step for people is to show up on May 10th and cast their vote, whether it's a yes or no. And then whatever the outcome is, we'll talk about where do we move next. But truly appreciate your participation. If you have any questions, email Jason. But thank you, and we'll stay around for a few minutes to answer any other questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.